Hi again, it's Miss Lisa from the St. Paris Public Library. Welcome back to Just Before Bed, and we're going to read a couple more chapters of our Pippi Longstocking book and see where the adventure takes us tonight. Chapter 7, Pippi Goes to the Circus. A circus had come to the little town, and all the children were begging their mothers and fathers for permission to go. Of course, Tommy and Annika asked to go too, and their kind father immediately gave them some money. Clutching it tightly in their hands, they rushed over to Pippi's. She was on the porch with her horse, braiding his tail into tiny pigtails and tying each one with red ribbon. "I think it's his birthday today," she announced, "so he has to be all dressed up." "Pippi," said Tommy, all out of breath because he had been running so fast. "Pippi, do you want to go with us to the circus?" "I can go with you almost anywhere," answered Pippi, "but whether I can go to the circus or not, I don't know, because I don't know what the circus is. Does it hurt?" "Silly," said Tommy, "of course it doesn't hurt. It's fun. Horses and clowns and pretty ladies that walk the tightrope." "But it costs money," said Annika, opening her small fist to see if the shiny $half and the quarters were still there. "I'm rich as a troll," said Pippi, "so I guess I can buy a circus, all right. But it'll be crowded here if I have more horses. The clowns and the pretty ladies I could keep in the laundry, but it's harder to know what to do with the horses." "Oh, don't be silly," said Tommy. "You don't buy a circus. It costs money to go and look at it. See?" "Preserve us," cried Pippi and shut her eyes tightly. "Costs money to look? And here I go around goggling all day long. Goodness knows how much money I've goggled up already." Then, little by little, she opened one eye very carefully, and it rolled round and round in her head. "Cost what it may," she said, "I must take a look." At last, Tommy and Annika managed to explain to Pippi that what a circus really was, and she took some gold pieces out of her suitcase. Then she put on her hat, which was as big as a millstone, and off they went. There were crowds of people outside the circus tent and a long line at the ticket window. But at last it was Pippi's turn. She stuck her head through the window and stared at the dear old lady sitting there. "How much does it cost to look at you?" Pippi asked. But the old lady was a foreigner who did not understand what Pippi meant and answered in broken Swedish. "Little girl, it costs $1 and a quarter in the grandstands and 75 cents in the benches and 25 cents for standing room." Now Tommy interrupted and said that Pippi wanted a 75-cent ticket. Pippi put down a gold piece and the old lady looked suspiciously at it. She bit it too, to see if it was genuine. At last she was convinced that it really was gold and gave Pippi her ticket and a great deal of change in silver. "What would I do with all those nasty little white coins?" asked Pippi disgustedly. "Keep them, and then I can look at you twice in the standing room." As Pippi absolutely refused to accept any change, the lady changed her ticket to one for the grandstand and gave Tommy and Annika grandstand tickets too, without their having to pay a single penny. In that way, Pippi, Tommy, and Annika came to sit on some beautiful red chairs right next to the ring. Tommy and Annika turned around several times to wave to their schoolmates, who were sitting much farther away. "This is a remarkable place," said Pippi, looking around in astonishment. "But see, they've spilled sawdust all over the floor. Not that I'm over fussy myself, but that does look careless to me." Tommy explained that all circuses had sawdust on the floor for the horses to run around in. On a platform nearby, the circus band suddenly began to play a thundering march. Pippi clapped her hands wildly and jumped up and down with delight. "Does it cost money to hear too?" she asked, "or can you do that for nothing?" At that moment, the curtain in front of the performer's entrance was drawn aside, and the ringmaster in a black frock coat with a whip in his hand came running in, followed by 10 white horses with red plumes on their heads. The ringmaster cracked the whip, and all the horses galloped around the ring. Then he cracked it again, and all the horses stood still, with their front feet up on the railing around the ring. One of them had stopped directly in front of the children. Annika didn't like to have a horse so near her and drew back in her chair as far as she could. But Pippi leaned forward and took the horse's right foot in her hands. "Hello there," she said. "My horse sent you his best wishes. It's his birthday today, but he has bows on his head instead of bows on his tail instead of on his head." Luckily, she dropped the foot before the ringmaster cracked his whip again, because then all the horses jumped away from the railing and began to run around the ring. When the act was over, the ringmaster bowed politely and the horses ran out. In an instant, the curtain opened again for a coal-black horse. On its back stood a beautiful lady dressed in green silk tights. The program said her name was Miss Carmencita. The horse trotted around in the sawdust, and Miss Carmencita stood calmly on his back and smiled. And then something happened. Just as the horse passed Pippi's seat, something came swishing through the air, and it was none other than Pippi herself. And there she stood on the horse's back behind Miss Carmencita. At first, Miss Carmencita was so astonished that she nearly fell off the horse. Then she got mad. She began to strike out with her hands behind her back to make Pippi jump off, but that didn't work. "Take it easy," said Pippi. Do you think you're the only one who can have fun? Other people have paid too, haven't they?" Then Miss Carmencita tried to jump off herself, but that didn't work either because Pippi was holding her tightly around the waist. At that, the audience couldn't help laughing. They thought it was funny to see the lovely Miss Carmencita held against her will by a little red-headed youngster who stood there on the horse's back in her enormous shoes and looked as if she had never done anything except perform in a circus. But the ringmaster didn't laugh. I bet he didn't. He was probably really mad. He turned towards the attendant in a red uniform and made a signal to him to go and stop the horse. "Is this act already over?" asked Pippi in a disappointed tone. "Just when we were having so much fun." "Horrible child," hissed the ringmaster between his teeth. "Get out of here." Pippi looked at him sadly. "Why are you so mad at me?" she asked. "What's the matter? I thought we were here to have fun." She skipped off the horse and went back to her seat. But now 2 huge guards came to throw her out. They took hold of her and tried to lift her up. They couldn't do it. Pippi sat absolutely still, and it was impossible to budge her, although they had tried as hard as they could. At last, they shrugged their shoulders and went off. Meanwhile, the next act had begun. It was Miss Elvira, about to walk the tightrope. She wore a pink tulle skirt and carried a pink parasol in her hand. With delicate little steps, she ran out on the rope. She swung her legs gracefully in the air and did all sorts of tricks. It looked so pretty. She even showed how she could walk backwards on the narrow rope. But when she got back to the little platform at the end of the rope, there stood Pippi. Oh no. "What are you going to do now?" asked Pippi, delighted, when she saw how astonished Miss Elvira looked. Miss Elvira said nothing at all, just jumped down from the rope and threw her arms around the ringmaster's neck, for he was her father. And the ringmaster once more sent for his guards to throw Pippi out. This time he sent for 5 of them, but all the people shouted, "Let her stay! We want to see the red-headed girl!" And they stamped their feet and clapped their hands. Pippi ran out on the rope, and Miss Elvira's tricks were as nothing compared to Pippi's. When she got to the middle of the rope, she stretched one leg straight up in the air, and her big shoe spread out like a roof over her head. She bent her foot a little so that she could tickle herself with it back of her ear. The ringmaster was not at all pleased to have Pippi performing in his circus. He wanted to get rid of her, and so he stole up and loosened the mechanism that held the rope taut, thinking surely Pippi would fall down. But Pippi didn't. She set the rope a-swinging instead. Back and forth it swayed, and Pippi swung faster and faster until suddenly she leaped into the air and landed right on the ringmaster. He was so frightened, he began to run. "Oh, what a jolly horse!" cried Pippi. "But why don't you have any pom-poms on your hair?" Now Pippi decided it was time to go back to Tommy and Annika. She jumped off the ringmaster and went back to her seat. The next act was about to begin, but there was a brief pause, because the ringmaster had to go out and get a drink of water and comb his hair. Then he came in again. bowed to the audience and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, in a moment you will be privileged to see the greatest marvel of all time, the strongest man in the world, the mighty Adolph, whom no one has yet been able to conquer. Here he comes, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me to present to you the mighty Adolph." Oh, Pippi ought to love interrupting this one. Remember, she's so strong. And into the ring stepped a man who looked as big as a giant. He wore flesh-colored tights and had a leopard skin draped around his stomach. He bowed to the audience and looked very pleased at himself. "Look at all these muscles," said the ringmaster, and squeezed the mighty Adolph's arm where the muscles stood out like balls under the skin. "And now, ladies and gentlemen, I have a very special invitation for you. Who will challenge the mighty Adolph to a wrestling match?" I think we can figure out who that'll be. "Which of you dares to try his strength against the world's strongest man? $100 for anyone who can conquer the mighty Adolph. $100, ladies and gentlemen. Think of that. Who will be the first to try?" Nobody came forth. "What did he say?" asked Pippi. "He says that anybody who can lick that big man will get $100, answered Tommy. "I can," said Pippi, "but I think it would be too bad, too, because he looks nice." "Oh, no, you couldn't," said Annika. "He's the strongest man in the world." "Man, yes," said Pippi, "but I am the strongest girl in the world. Remember that?" Meanwhile, the mighty Adolph was lifting heavy iron weights and bending thick iron rods in the middle just to show how strong he was. "Oh, come now, ladies and gentlemen," cried the ringmaster. "Is there really nobody here who wants to earn $100? Should I really be forced to keep this myself?" And he waved a bill in the air. "No, that you certainly won't be forced to do," said Pippi, and stepped over the railing into the ring. The ringmaster was absolutely wild when he saw her. "Get out of here! I don't want to see any more of you," he hissed. "Why do you always have to be so unfriendly?" said Pippi reproachfully. "I just want to fight with Mr. Adolph." "This is no place for jokes," said the ringmaster. "Get out of here before the mighty Adolph hears your impudent nonsense." But Pippi went right by the ringmaster and up to mighty Adolph. She took his hand and shook it heartily. "Shall we fight a little, you and I?" she asked. Mighty Adolph looked at her but didn't understand a word. "In 1 minute I'll begin," said Pippi. And begin she did. She grabbed mighty Adolph around the waist, and before anyone knew what was happening, she'd thrown him on the mat. Mighty Adolph leaped up, his face absolutely scarlet. "Atta girl, Pippi!" shrieked Tommy and Annika so loudly that all the people at the circus heard it and began to shrink. "Atta girl, Pippi!" too. The ringmaster sat on the railing, wringing his hands. He was mad, but mighty Adolph was madder. Never in his life had he experienced anything so humiliating as this, and he certainly intended to show that red-headed girl what kind of man mighty Adolph really was. He rushed at Pippi and caught her around the waist, but Pippi stood firm as a rock. "You can do better than that," she said, encouraging him. Then she wiggled out of his grasp, and in the twinkling of an eye, mighty Adolph was on the mat again. Pippi stood beside him, waiting. She didn't have to wait long. With a roar, he was up again, rushing at her. "Diddle-de-palm and diddle-de-day," said Pippi. All the people in the tent stamped their feet and threw their hats in the air and shouted, "Hurrah, Pippi!" And when Adolph came rushing at her for the third time, Pippi lifted him in the air and with her arms straight above her, carried him clear around the ring. Then she laid him down on the mat again and held him there. "Now, little fella," she said, "I don't think we'll bother about this anymore. We'll never have any more fun than we've had already." "Pippi is the winner! Pippi is the winner!" cried all the people. Mighty Adolph stole out as fast as he could, and the ringmaster had to go up and hand Pippi the $100, although he looked as if he'd much prefer to eat her. "Here you are, young lady, here you are," he said, $100. "That thing?" said Pippi scornfully. "What would I want with that old piece of paper? Take it and use it to fry herring on if you want to." And she went back to her seat. "This is certainly a long circus," she said to Tommy and Annika. "I think I'll take a little snooze, but wake me if they need my help with anything else." And then she lay back in her chair and went to sleep at once. There she lay and snored while the clowns and the sword swallowers and the snake charmers did their tricks for Tommy and Annika and all the rest of the people at the circus. Just the same, I think Pippi was the best of all, whispered Tommy and Annika. Chapter 8. Pippi entertains two burglars. After Pippi's performance at the circus, there was not a single person in all the little town who did not know how strong she was. There was even a piece about her in the paper, but people who lived in other places, of course, didn't know who Pippi was. One dark autumn evening, two tramps came walking down the road past Villa Villacula. They were two bad thieves wandering about the country to see what they could steal. They saw that there was a light in the windows of Villa Villacula and decided to go in and ask for a sandwich. That evening, Pippi had poured out all her gold pieces on the kitchen floor and sat there counting them. To be sure, she couldn't count very well, but she did it now and then anyway, just to keep everything in order. 65, 66, 67, 68, 69, 60, 10, 60, 11, 60, 12, 60, 13, 16, 16. Whew! Makes my throat feel like 60. Goodness, there must be some more numbers in their arithmetic. Oh yes, now I remember. 104, 1,000. That certainly is a lot of money, said Pippi. There was a loud knock on the door. Walk in or stay out, whichever you choose, shouted Pippi. I never force anyone against his will. The door opened and the two tramps came in. You can imagine that they opened their eyes when they saw a little red-headed girl sitting all alone on the floor counting money. Are you all alone at home? They asked craftily. Of course not, said Pippi. Mr. Nilsson is at home too. The thieves couldn't very well know that Mr. Nilsson was a monkey sleeping in a little green bed with a doll's quilt around his stomach. They thought the man of the house must be named Mr. Nilsson, and they winked at each other. We can come back a little later, is what they meant. But to Pippi they said, we'll just come in and ask what your clock is. They were so excited that they had forgotten all about the sandwich. Great strong men who don't know what a clock is, said Pippi. Where in the world were you brought up? The clock is a little round thingamajig that says tick-tack, tick-tack, that goes and goes but never gets to the door. Do you know any more riddles? Out with them if you do, said Pippi encouragingly. The tramps thought Pippi was too little to tell time, so without another word they went out again. I don't demand that you say tack, thanks, in Swedish, shouted Pippi after them, but you could at least make an effort and say tick. You haven't even as much sense as a clock has, but by all means go in peace, and Pippi went back to her counting. No sooner were the tramps outside than they had began to rub their hands with delight. Did you see all that money? Heavenly day, said one of them. Yes, once in a while luck is with us, said the other. All we need to do is wait until the kid and Mr. Nilsson are asleep. Then we'll sneak in and grab the dough. They sat down under an oak tree in the garden to wait. A drizzling rain was falling. They were very hungry, so they were quite uncomfortable, but the thought of all that money kept their spirits up. From time to time, lights went out in other houses, but in Villa Villacula they shone on. It so happened that Pippi was learning to dance the shitashes. She didn't want to go to bed until she was sure she could do it. At last, however, the lights went out in the windows of Villa Villacula too. The tramps waited quite a while until they were sure Mr. Nilsson would have gone to sleep. At last they crept quietly up to the kitchen door and prepared to open it with their burglar tools. Meanwhile, one of them, his name as a matter of fact, was Bloom, just happened to feel the doorknob. The door was not locked. Well, some people are smart, he whispered to his companion. The door is open. So much the better for us, answered his companion, a black-haired man called Thunder Carlson, by those who knew him. Thunder Carlson turned on his pocket flashlight, and they crept into the kitchen. There was no one there. In the next room was Pippi's bed, and there also stood Mr. Nilsson's little doll bed. Thunder Carlson opened the door and looked around carefully. Everything was quiet as he played his flashlight around the room. When the light touched Pippi's bed, the two tramps were amazed to see nothing but a pair of feet on the pillow. Pippi, as usual, had her head under the covers at the foot of the bed. That must be the girl, whispered Thunder Carlson to Bloom, and no doubt she sleeps soundly. But where in the world is Nilsson, do you suppose? Mr. Nilsson, if you please, came Pippi's calm voice from under the covers. Mr. Nilsson is in the little green doll bed. The tramps were so startled that they almost rushed out at once, and then it suddenly dawned on them that Pippi had said what Pippi had said. Mr. Nilsson was laying in a doll's bed, and now in the light of the flashlight they could see a little bed and the tiny monkey laying in it. Thunder Carlson couldn't help but laughing. Bloom, he said, Mr. Nilsson is a monkey. Can you beat that? Well, what do you think he was? Came Pippi's calm voice from under the covers. A lawnmower? Aren't your mother and father at home? Asked Bloom. No, said Pippi, they're gone, completely gone. Thunder Carlson and Bloom chuckled with delight. Listen, little girl, said Thunder Carlson, come out so we can talk to you. No, I'm sleeping, said Pippi. Is it more riddles you want? If so, answer this one. What is it that goes and goes but never gets to the door? Now Bloom went over and pulled the covers off Pippi. Can you dance the Scottish? Asked Pippi, looking at him gravely in the eyes. I can. You ask too many questions, said Thunder Carlson. Can we ask a few too? Where, for instance, is the money you had on the floor a little while ago? In the suitcase on top of the wardrobe, answered Pippi truthfully. Thunder Carlson and Bloom grinned. I hope you don't have anything against our taking it, little friend, said Thunder Carlson. Certainly not, said Pippi. Of course I don't. Whereupon Bloom lifted down the suitcase. I hope you don't have anything against my taking it back, little friend, said Pippi, getting out of bed and stepping over to Bloom. Bloom had no idea how it all happened, but suddenly the suitcase was in Pippi's hand. Here, quit your fooling, said Thunder Carlson angrily. Hand over the suitcase. He took Pippi firmly by the hand and tried to snatch back the booty. Fooling, fooling, too much fooling, said Pippi, and lifted Thunder Carlson up on the wardrobe. A moment later, she and Bloom up there too. Then the tramps were frightened. They began to see that Pippi was no ordinary girl. However, the suitcase tempted them so much they forgot their fright. Come on now, both together, yelled Thunder Carlson, and they jumped down for the wardrobe and threw themselves on Pippi, who had the suitcase in her hand. Pippi gave each one a little poke with her finger, and they shrank away into the corner. Before they had a chance to get up again, Pippi had fetched a rope and, quick as a flash, had bound the arms and legs of both burglars. Now they sang a different tune. Please, please, miss, begged Thunder Carlson. Forgive us. We were only joking. Don't hurt us. We're just two tramps who came to ask for food. Bloom began to cry a bit. Pippi put the suitcase neatly back on the wardrobe. Then she turned to her prisoners. Can either of you dance the Scottish? Why, yes, said Thunder Carlson. I guess we both can. Oh, what fun, cried Pippi, clapping her hands. Can we dance a little? I've just learned, you know. Well, certainly, by all means, said Thunder Carlson, a bit confused. Pippi took some large scissors and cut the rope that bound her guest. But we don't have any music, she said in a worried voice. Then she had an idea. Can't you blow on a comb? She asked to Bloom. And I'll dance with him, she pointed to Thunder Carlson. Oh, yes, Bloom could blow on a comb all right, and blow he did, so that you could hear it all through the house. Mr. Nilsson sat up in bed, wide awake, just in time to see Pippi whirling around with Thunder Carlson. She was dead serious and danced as if her little life depended on it. At last, Bloom said he couldn't blow on the comb any longer because it tickled his mouth unmercifully. And Thunder Carlson, who had tramped the roads all day long, began to feel tired. Oh, please, just a little longer, begged Pippi, dancing on. And Bloom and Thunder Carlson could do nothing but continue. At 3 a.m, Pippi said, I could keep on dancing until Thursday, but maybe you're tired and hungry. That was exactly what they were, though they hardly dared to say so. Pippi went to the pantry and took out bread and cheese and butter, ham and cold roast and milk, and they sat around the kitchen table, Bloom and Thunder Carlson and Pippi, and ate until they were almost four-cornered. Pippi poured a little milk into her ear. That's good for earache, she said. Poor thing, have you got an earache? Asked Bloom. No, said Pippi, but I might get one. Finally, the two tramps got up, thanked Pippi for the food, and begged to be allowed to say goodbye. If it's awfully jolly that you came, do you really have to go so soon?" said Pippi regretfully. "Never have I seen anyone who can dance the schottische the way that you do, my sugar pig," she said to Thunder Carlson, and to Bloom, "If you keep on practicing on the comb, you won't notice the tickling." As they were going out the door, Pippi came running around after them and gave them each a gold piece. "These you have honestly earned," she said. I hope you've enjoyed Pippi Longstocking so far. It is a pretty good book. The chapters are a little bit long, but it's kind of fun, and she's just a very different kind of person. So join us tomorrow as we finish up our chapter book, Pippi Longstocking.